Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney Yeager, and I'm the Public Programs Coordinator at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I'm so excited to introduce today's program, Drawing It Out, Graphic Novels, Teenagers, and the Holocaust. Joining us today are RJ Palacio, Ken Krimstein, and David Polonsky. They will be in conversation with AJ Frost. RJ is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Wonder. The book's message inspired the Choose Kind movement and has been embraced by readers around the world. Wonder was made into a blockbuster movie starring Julia Roberts, Owen Wilson, and Jacob Tremblay. Palacio's other New York Times bestselling books include Pony and the graphic novel White Bird, which is currently being filmed as a major motion picture starring Gillian Anderson and Helen Mirren. Palacio lives in Brooklyn with her husband, 2 sons, and 2 dogs. Ken Krimstein is a cartoonist for the New Yorker magazine and is also the author of the graphic biography, The 3 Escapes of Hannah Arendt, A Tyranny of Truth, which was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award in History and has been published in 8 languages. His new graphic history is When I Grow Up, The Lost Autobiographies of 6 Yiddish Teenagers. David Polonsky is the illustrator of Anne Frank's diary, the graphic adaptation. His illustrations have appeared in many of Israel's leading newspapers and magazines. He has illustrated a number of children's books and won the Israel Museum Award for Children's Book Illustration in 2004 and 2008. David was the art director and lead artist for Waltz with Bashir, an animated documentary feature, which was an official selection in the 2008 Cannes Film Festival. AJ Frost will be our moderator, is a staff writer and newsletter editor for the Comics Beat, as well as a grant writer for the ASU Foundation for a New American University. His work has appeared in Heeb, Jewish News of Greater Phoenix, and the Jewish Book Council website. AJ, his wife Eden, and their cat Moses live in Phoenix, Arizona, and Superman remains his favorite comic book character. During today's discussion, please feel free to share questions in the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. So thank you all so much for being here, and I'm now going to hand things over to AJ.
Thank you so much, Sydney. I really appreciate that really nice introduction, and thank you to all people from over the world who are joining us today. This is a fantastic program, and I'm so honored that the Museum of Jewish Heritage asked me to moderate. So I am so glad that everyone has joined us today, and I'm really excited to chat with our panelists, RJ, David, and Ken, whose work I really admired. I've either reviewed or interviewed all of these panelists before, and so I'm so happy that we can share this with you. If Sydney, should we all share our screens now, or should we?
Yeah, if everybody wants to come on camera,
yeah,
that'd be great.
Hi.
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 So nice to see everyone. Hi, Ken. Hi, David. So I wanted to start, when we first started thinking about this panel a few months ago, how could we have foreseen that Holocaust comic books would be so in the zeitgeist with the banning of Maus in Tennessee? So I kind of wanted to start our conversation there to talk about Maus, and also to talk about the importance of graphic novels as a kind of way to disseminate the Holocaust, especially the history of the Holocaust. So I think, RJ, can we start with you and then go Ken and then David about what Maus means, what the banning means, and how your work responds to literature of the Holocaust, and yeah, like your process, all that great stuff. So yeah.
Well, obviously it's horrifying that books are being banned in the United States at any level, any type of book. Maus was and still is. I mean, it's not even a question of. I remember reading Maus, and it was the first time that I felt like I didn't actually read a book. I experienced it, I lived it. And so I was just, I'm sorry, those were my dogs. I think you should move on to someone else while I put them in the other room. I'm so sorry about that. I'll sort of cede my time to Ken or somebody else. Sorry.
Yeah, Ken.
Okay. My cats are quiet. Mouse, yeah. I mean, without Mouse, I mean, you know, in many ways, it's the father. I would say, it's kind of the father of us all. I mean, that when that book came out, it was a revelation for me. Although I've always loved comics, but the way that the art and the words work together, and I agree. I think banning any kind of books is just, especially for a topic like this, is just not the right thing to do. And I, you know, we were talking about it, and you know, whatever the reasons were that they may have said, you're talking about kids today, you know, they can look at stuff on their phones, which is far more insane than anybody can even imagine. Why can't they read literature like this? I you know, again, I just don't understand it. Dogs silenced. I cede my time to the senator from Brooklyn.
Sorry about that. It's just such an important topic. And it's, I just wanted to say that Mouse was absolutely instrumental in inspiring me, my graphic novel, Whitebird. I mean, I don't think I would have thought to do Whitebird had Mouse not paved the way. And I'm sure we all feel the same way. It was just absolutely, for me, as somebody growing up in New York City, who is not Jewish, by the way, having this sort of profound illustrated testament to this story was, again, one of the most impactful experiences I had ever experienced as a reader, as a young person, as a writer, as an author, on every level. And the idea that we are somehow limiting that experience to children, to teenagers, to other people is just horrifying. Horrifying.
David, what was the response to Mouse in Israel when it first came out?
It was belated because it's not like a very comics oriented culture, so it took a while for us to catch up, but it's paradigmatic for all comics artists. I have nothing to add to what's been said, except that I'm sure that this work will outlive this period of banning books. That's so we just need to keep fighting on, and it's just a shame for this generation. That's it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, as someone who also grew up with reading Maus, and you know, I think I received it for my bar mitzvah when I was in 8th grade or whatever. It was really an impactful book for me to actually see. It's hard. Something that I would like to kind of transition onto is the visual aspect of a graphic novel really brings the story to the reader in a way that it's just different than prose. And I guess what I would like to say for the kind of the next point of the conversation is, why graphic novels? Why use this type of medium to convey the story? Why not prose? Why not something else? So why were graphic novels? Why do you think they are probably maybe the prime way to kind of disseminate the kind of information? And Ken, you think you could start?
Well, I think when pictures and words come together, we experience. It's like a performance. It's like you feel it. And as a person who draws, and I've always drawn, I know that you can get a certain amount of emotion from a drawing, but then when you put just those right words with it, I like to say there's human beings, we kind of read with our eyes in many ways. Our eyes are very advanced, and everybody kind of knows how to do it. I mean, with my books, even people who say, I never read a comic, well, you read a Bazooka Joe bubblegum thing and you got that. So then, it's a great way to immerse people in a setting, I think. So that's why I like it.
David?
I think that the question of the serious topics like the Holocaust, you can apply it to any medium. you know, like the famous, I think it's Paul Celan said that you can't write poetry after Auschwitz, but we have to, and we do. And comics is an art. Talking about Mouse, since that book and many others, it's just another art form and a mean of expression, and it's no different from any others. So I'm not sure that it's the medium, but I'm sure that it's a great medium.
RJ?
Yeah, I would agree with what they've already said, and just add that for me, it was a question of also wanting to be able to share the story, which, you know, is intended for younger people, maybe fourth grade and up, with as many readers, as many young readers as possible. And I thought a full color graphic novel was the way of sort of reaching as wide an audience of possibly non-readers as possible as well. So I wanted to just kind of open it up. And I also had this very visual idea for the story in mind. I mean, I think one of the most fun things about creating a graphic novel is you kind of get to represent the movie that's playing in your head, you know, because when you're drawing a graphic novel, you get to be sort of the director and the cinematographer and the costume designer and the lighting director all at once, you know, and deciding how best to translate the story that's in your head visually, along with the dialogue and all of that. So so for those reasons, that's why I decided to just kind of, you know, I also wanted to write a graphic novel and draw. So
Great. You know, with the graphic novels that are part of the conversation today, you know, When I Grow Up, the Anne Frank graphic adaptation, and Whitebird, two of these are historical, and one of them is historical fiction. So I wanted to kind of talk about the process of each, because each is a little bit different. And in David's case, you had, and Ken to an extent, but with David's case, the Anne Frank, Diary of Anne Frank is so well known in the Western canon now. And I want to know about how you approached that project, what were the challenges, and what were the opportunities to kind of get it. It's kind of hard to say get it out to a wider audience. I think a lot of people know Anne Frank's story, but how do you even go beyond what is to go beyond, you know, what people have read through the last few decades? How do you do something that's new and fresh?
Well, in fact, it's sort of a commissioned project. We were approached by the Anne Frank Fund in Basel. So Ari Foreman, with whom I've been working for 15 years of different projects, got a call, said they're saying they want to make an animated film based on the diary. What do you think about it? At first it was a film, then it became a graphic novel. And we both said, of course, no. Because it's very close to kitsch. She's become an icon, and it's an image that's being used for all kinds of purposes. She's the symbol of hooligans of a soccer club in Italy, and MCs have her tattoos on their faces. It's like a kind of this. It's hard to approach because it's so iconic. But then we had another thought about it, and we realized that somebody's going to do it. And so this is kind of this thing of responsibility and a challenge. And then we reread the book, this time as adults, and we were compelled to do it because, first of all, for me, the rediscovery was of her humor. Of Anne, she's a very funny little teenager. She's sarcastic and she's so clever, and she's a prolific writer. She's gifted, and this is not part of the image. This is not part of the icon. So our approach was to emphasize exactly that. To make it funny when it's funny, and to show her complexity, the way she could be very annoying. We made a point out of including the part where she's talking about her first period, because she's growing up, and all of these humane things for us are the message, are the kind of to dig under this monument and to do something a little bit subversive, to show her humanity, which I think represents her values. So it's harmonic with the text.
And RJ, I know that White Bird is historical fiction, but just because it's fiction doesn't mean that there's not a lot of research that has to go into creating such a project. So what was your process as you were writing and creating the story for White Bird?
Well, that the approach is almost the same, just because, when you're writing something, for instance, you can get away with saying, Sarah opened the barn door. And the reader can make any kind of, you might even say the blue barn door or something like that. But when you're drawing historical fiction, you have to research what barn doors in 1938 France looked like in that region, and the specificity of all of the details, what the lanterns looked like, what kind of flashlights they would have used, what kind of uniforms the French gendarmes would have used, as opposed to, what Nazi units were in that region at that time. Unfortunately, I found myself going deeper and deeper into rabbit holes that I never would have wanted to go into. But I just felt that in order to really portray the world, even though the story is fictional, the world is not. And the history obviously has to be represented with absolute deference. And there could be no sort of, to me at least, I thought there's no dramatic license whatsoever allowed. There are parameters that are set, and they're finite, and I have to work my story within them. So as a result, I think the research that went into it was probably very similar to the research that has to go into any work of historical sort of narrative. So and that was my approach.
And Ken, for your book, the texts that you base the graphic novel on were rediscovered only a few years ago. So while these people were real, they were a bit anonymous. So you have like this kind of middle ground where you're working with real documents, but we don't really know too much about the people who wrote them. Although there is an example. Let's not go in digression. But how did you go about creating and trying to figure out the different pieces that go into creating this graphic novel?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to pick up on what these guys both said. I did a ton of research. I mean, before I knew it, I was in Vilnius, Lithuania, Vilna, walking the streets, trying to see how, where was the ghetto situated to the parade ground, situated to the river, and how, so I got a sense of the physical space. And then I did a ton, I got them translated, and I started to try and figure out who they were. So if somebody said I played the mandolin, and this was my passion, I did, like RJ, I found out that mandolin orchestras were a huge thing in Eastern Europe. They couldn't afford violins, but they could all get mandolins, and they would have orchestras with mandolins the size of bass fiddles and everything. So then I started to get that kind of stuff. So I put the pieces together to try and have it fill this, to make this world come alive. So it was that, I love that part, collecting all the, and then you sketch and you redo it, and yeah.
And the artifacts of history, I think they hold a real, I like when you can actually hold something, and thank goodness for eBay in a lot of ways, because I know that I found myself, ordering things online from, I needed a little Newsboys cap from the 1930s and stuff, and I got it online. So, there's something really moving too about holding these artifacts.
And I have to say, and looking at the other books that we've done, I mean, we're dealing with a very similar time period, which was a long time ago. So they wore certain kinds of dresses. Hats were big, right?
Right.
you know, we had to learn that, right? And when you're drawing it, oh, that's what hats were all about. Like, I didn't even, for women, you know, forget men, but women wore hats, you know, it's an important thing.
I have to show you guys something. This is because it's exactly what you were talking about. It's my favorite research part of the book. She's having Annie's describing a vivid dream that she had, that she got a bit of money from her dad, and she's imagining all the stuff that she's gonna buy, and it's a very long list, and I have no idea what these garments and undergarments mean, and this is a wonderful way to connect to the 12-year-old girl inside me, and it was sort of a joyous journey into 40s fashion.
That's great.
Incredible.
Yeah,
that is great. I guess moving on from that is, how much do you think your work could be considered a pedagogical tool, and how much of it is just trying to tell a great story? And RJ, maybe you can start.
You know, I hope that they are, you know, I would love for them to be used in classrooms. I would love for teachers to use them as starting points. You know, I know that both my sons read Mouse, for instance, in high school, and it was the beginning of again, for them, it was an entire experience, and it was something that they could then layer other readings over. And so if Whitebird could be used to that end, I would be proud. But it's also a reading experience. It's also, you know, in the case of Whitebird, it is a love story of two teenagers who fall in love during this sort of horrible time. I also wanted to show, because there was a timeliness to the reason. One of the reasons I wrote this when I wrote it, even though it was before sort of this horrible surge in anti-Semitism in this country and elsewhere, when I started working on it. But you know, there was something going on in this country too. There were, you know, the Muslim ban and sort of the othering of groups of people. And, you know, we know that genocides don't start with mass murders. They start with hateful words. They start with rhetoric. They start with the normalizing of hatred, basically. And so I wrote Whitebird because I wanted to show how this little girl experienced that in her country, in France. It's a story of a young girl who is Jewish, who begins the story, you know, as an average, normal little girl going to school and happy as can be. And slowly, as France becomes occupied by Germany, you know, the French Jews were othered within their own country, and ultimately they saw terrible fates as well. And so I just wanted to show young people, especially, how that could happen. It starts one way. It starts with words. It starts with bans. It starts with censorship. And then it becomes what it became. And so if, you know, kids come to it, or young readers come to my book in order to just sort of get into a good story, but ultimately they start learning something, that's great too, you know.
David?
What was the question again?
Oh, it just was, are these graphic novels, should they be used as pedagogical tools, like teaching tools, or should they just be experienced almost as just a reading experience for entertainment? You know, what do you feel is like the best way to kind of experience the book?
I think as a children's book illustrator, I'm a little bit afraid of this kind of term of education, because usually it's first of all my own expression, but in this case it's absolutely educational. But not in the factual, not necessarily in a factual way, but more of like this humanities approach. It's like it's like an aesthetic education. I think the fact that the way if a young reader connects to this character through her humor, through her liveliness, or through the fact that the drawings are pretty or whatever, then you're drawing, you're reenacting history in a much more efficient way than just naming the fact. In this case, of course, it's also an historic document that we have to respect the text. And then, of course, a lot of research went into it, visiting the house in Amsterdam and all of that. But I think it's mainly the humanistic idea that the people are complex, that things are not like black and white, and you can teach kids that through art, not by telling them, but by showing them.
Ken?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was very much about the story, but it's history, and I did want to respect the documents. But I found so all of these happened before the war. These kids did not know the war was coming. I mean, I lived in New York on 9/10/2001, and we did not know, it was just a normal day, and then and so I wanted to use this as a lens to kind of say what the others have been saying, that these are just normal kids, teenagers want to live a life, and I had to keep a boundary as writing as a historian. I couldn't let the fact that they couldn't have any idea what was coming to them. I had to be totally true to them and let the person who's reading it, we know. So in a way, the reader is in an ironic or a privileged position. The characters, maybe a lot like what, David and what we all try and do, they don't know, we, the reader. So, I guess to an extent, if you're supposed to learn anything from history or reading history, if this is apparent, then that's, I guess you would say, the pedagogical version. But I wanted it, I had to pick 6 that had stories in them that I could illustrate. I mean, some of them were very internal, some of them weren't, they were partial. I wanted scenes that I could draw, that could make a story.
I just read a fact that really kind of shook me to my core, a statistic that said 23% of 18 to 39-year-olds believe that the Holocaust was either a myth, had been exaggerated, or we're not sure. And that's from the Claims Conference study of 2020. This is only 2 years ago. And so what I'm not saying that you guys have writers, creative people have an obligation to teach this or to present this material, but when you hear that fact, how does that make you feel? And now that you've been a part of this creative process to create a book that does feature this, horrible time in history as your subject, how do you disseminate the information in a way that gets to people, that allows them to explore the material, but maybe not judge them for not knowing everything about the Holocaust or even knowing even the basis of the Holocaust? How do you bring them into the conversation so that they can ask the questions? RJ.
You do it carefully, but you do it. I mean, I did feel a responsibility to I've always thought, again, I grew up in New York. My husband's Jewish, I'm not, but I grew up knowing about the Holocaust. I was always stunned to find out how many people actually don't, and there's a good number of people out there who, as you just pointed to that statistic, who did not grow up hearing about the Holocaust. I mean, for my husband, whose mother lost family, this was a very, very visceral and it was part of his upbringing. It was part of his, his community. I mean, there wasn't anybody who wasn't impacted by this. And it just has always seemed to me strange that we could live in 2 alternate worlds where there are people who know about the Holocaust viscerally, who've experienced it, who have relatives who were lost, and that they're growing up side by side with people who have never heard about it or deny it. It just seems crazy. And I think part of that is that for whatever reasons, I don't think the Holocaust is really taught in schools at younger grade levels in the United States. I mean, it's not part of any curriculum. And that's one of the reasons why, again, I wanted to write Whitebird, which is for younger audiences, because I knew that in many cases, it would be a young reader's first introduction to the Holocaust. And I thought, so I felt that responsibility very keenly of sort of introducing this theme to people who have grown up with it, and also to young readers who knew nothing of it. And so there's a very thorough glossary and appendix at the back of Whitebird for anybody who wants to read more. You know, there's, you know, I point them to the diary of Anne Frank, you know, all of those things. Because I think we really do have an opportunity to, you know, not let future generations forget. You know, that is an obligation. I think it's a moral obligation. It's an imperative.
And, you know, kind of piggybacking on that, I mean, what's so interesting about your book is, as you said, it's right before the war. All the people that you draw their life from the essay, they don't know what the Holocaust is quite yet. And so in a way, you're showing a kind of reality that people don't really know. I think people just assume that Nazis came to power and then immediately there was the death camps. But you're showing like this in between world where there was, I wouldn't say peace, but there was, people just thought life would go on. So how do you kind of explain this kind of region where people don't really know the history? Like they really don't know this kind of aspect of the Holocaust where people just kind of live their life.
Well, that's what I wanted to,
really bad.
that's what I wanted to try and show. I mean, we're historically in a very interesting time where the last sort of adults that ever, I mean, pretty soon the Holocaust is just going to be a completely historical event. Like nobody who ever lived through it is going to be around anymore. And I felt like, you know, I agree with, I mean, the statistics that you talk about are just, I mean, they're incomprehensible to me, and governments and people have to do things about it. What can I do as a storyteller? Well, you know, I thought by having that window, it's kind of like it could happen. It's real. It could happen like anytime, any place, to anybody. They didn't know. There was not, you know, I read a lot of history. People, you know, they don't know what's going to happen. 1939, they didn't know what it was going to be like in 1942 or 1945. And I was trying to say, you know, maybe you think you know, and I'm not going to talk about like other, you know, because I think maybe there is a lot of information about the Holocaust out there, maybe not, I don't know. But this to me was a way of saying we're all vulnerable and we're all human. And boy, oh boy, what we would have given to have a time machine in 1939 and say, no, this is happening. But it made it more powerful to me to not let them know, to show that, yeah, that was just, hey, you know, I read in one of the autobiographies, somebody wrote and said, gosh, I'm writing this because I can imagine what it's going to be like here in Poland with the Jews in 1955. And I just, what? I mean, that to me was the thing that said, I got to do this book.
Mm-hmm.
David, how is it, you know, the context is a little bit different in Israel than it is in the United States, I feel, because there's so many first connections to someone who is a Holocaust survivor whose family experienced the Shoah. But how do you continue telling these stories in ways that that really affect how people behave or how they see the world or how they can take the lessons of the Holocaust and internalize it so that the society, you know, improves or gets better, or progresses in a way that is more equitable for everyone?
Well, in Israel, we don't have a shortage of Holocaust studies in schools, but I must say that it doesn't mean that kids understand it better. Because as I remember my school days, I don't remember, I remember great teachers, but I don't, but there were few, and just if somebody was giving me the information and didn't get me really involved. I read Anne Frank's diary when I was 16, and I'm not sure I was moved. to tell you the truth. It felt to me a girly story, and I'm a boy. You know, I needed because there was nobody to get me involved. And I think what's important to do, it's like this, the Jewish thing of starting to retell the story, because this history is quickly turning into text. The last Holocaust survivors are passing, as Ken mentioned, and there's nothing to do about it, and it's becoming a story now. I mean, it's our responsibility to keep telling it in every which possible way,
Right.
and that's the main reason not to ban books, of course, because just keep it up, and that's the great Jewish tradition of repeating and repeating and repeating text in different contexts and adjusting it to changing circumstances, to history. And that's through stories. The facts are gone. Nobody knows exactly what happened. Nobody will ever know, and that's it.
When you were writing the book, did you have a specific demographic in mind? I know that sometimes that a comic is marketed towards a younger audience or is marketed as an adult graphic novel, but really the experience, I feel, for all these is almost universal. I mean, do you feel like that there should be some kind of demographic that each is supposed to appeal to, or that everyone can just enjoy the comic for what it is? Ken, what do you think?
I did not know. I'm still trying to work that out, and I think the people who are no, I didn't. I wrote it for my kids, I guess, you know, who are in their 20s. I don't know. I wrote it for anybody, mine.
Yeah. RJ, I mean, I know that yours is Whitebird is kind of marketed as a YA, young adult graphic novel, but I mean, I read that, you know, I read this a few years ago, and it really moved me too. So
yeah, it could. I think that the beauty of graphic novels is they are aged that anyone could read them. I mean, I definitely I am known as the author of Wonder. That comes with a fan base immediately, and what's nice is to be able to use one's fan base. I mean, there are a lot of people who love Wonder who then want to read the next book by the author of Wonder. And I really wanted to use my platform to, again, try to reach as many young people. So I was specifically writing for that age group 10 and up, again, 10 to 100. But that was a very purposeful and you know, it was a very purposeful thing. You know, I definitely was looking for the younger group.
David?
It was clear from the start, especially for Ari Fullman, who was responsible for the adaptation, the editing. His parents kind of met in the last days of the Warsaw Ghetto. They got married on their way to the concentration camp. And Holocaust humor is a daily thing. Was a daily thing in the studio when we were working on films. It's like it's every day, and again, mostly through humor, of course. And now he has teenage kids. He had teenage. They were in the 20s already, and truth be told, kids read less these days, and he specifically set out a goal to get them.
You know, what do you think was the greatest challenge of creating these graphic novels? Were there elements that you wanted to include but couldn't? Was there stuff that you thought might be too graphic to include in a way? Or comics are so deliberate, but I'm just curious if there was stuff that had to be cut out. You know, David, I mean, with the Anne Frank graphic novel, I mean, because people know it, was there stuff that you felt you had to include almost everything?
It was impossible to include everything, because it would have been a 4,000 long pages of comics. And that was a great challenge, especially for Ari, and he would condense the material, and he had to keep the original text and edit it in a way that it will work. And he took the liberty of adding text inside the balloons. So the voiceover is the original, very condensed, of course. I think, but there were points that I mentioned that the talk about puberty, for example. We made a point out of including that part. Although in earlier editions of the diary, it was edited out. As long as
Right.
Otto, her father, was alive, he couldn't allow it. He was born in the 19th century, so it makes sense. But now times have changed and audiences have changed, and talk about sexuality is not as problematic. So that was an issue on the one hand. On the other hand, we didn't want to alienate different kinds of conservative audiences. Like, for example, I would love for readers in Muslim culture. It's been translated to Arabic to read them, where values about these issues are different from mine. So it was like this very difficult balance of finding a way. That there's a passage when she mentions that she's excited by female nudity. Now it's very difficult to depict in it. So we found this kind of roundabout way using Greek sculptures because it's part of her world. She was an admirer of Greek mythology and everything. So there are sculptures. So these kinds of solutions. To keep as much in as possible. And the other difficult part was the ending, because the diary stops, it doesn't end, and we know that it ends. So it was important to do something that sums things up. That's the place where I'm farthest from Anne, because I know this is the last entry and she doesn't. And first of all, it's heartbreaking and complicated, and it took the 2 years of work on the book to figure out the last illustration. And in the end, it's like a compilation of the different Annes that we have in the book, her different moods, because she mentions it in the last entry. She says, "Why I'm such a..." She's a teenager. Why I'm like that, and then I'm like this. So we show all the different faces, and in a way, it's a conclusion of the initial goal is of showing complexity, showing something, the human behind the icon.
RJ?
I told whatever was necessary and showed whatever was necessary to tell the story, and didn't hold back. Also, though, consciously making sure that I never just used the Holocaust as a gimmick, so to speak, as a place to, you have to be reverential too. You have to be somber and approach it with that sort of reverence for the subject matter. So I wanted to always make sure that whatever I portrayed, whatever scenes I portrayed, that there was never anything gratuitous, or there was never anything that wasn't absolutely essential to telling the specific story that I was telling.
Ken?
Yeah, I learned of this civilization, this entire world that I didn't know about, that was far more complicated than I ever thought. And I ended up calling it Yiddishuania because because it went all the way from like Latvia down to Crimea, and all they had in common was they all spoke Yiddish. But between there were right-wingers, left-wingers, communists, this, that, and I wanted to connect this bizarre world, which I loved. They did tango dancing and all this stuff with what it's like to be a teenager that I remember from being a teenager. And so that I was hoping that there's a universal, and they didn't even call them teenagers in those days. They called them youth, but I wanted to get that kind of power of possibility that teens had from the 30s and make it relate to a universal thing. So that was a lot of, but I saw that there were similarities, and I saw people that I knew from high school, a women's libber, a jock, a poet, wannabe Joni Mitchell, even though there weren't even Joni Mitchells in those days. I saw them, they were all there. So that was what I had to try and do.
Yeah.
So this is going to be my last question before we move on to Q&A. But what do you want readers to walk away with after they finish your book? What's the feeling or the thought that you wish that they would have? This could be the idealized version of what you would want, or maybe there's like a realistic one. But RJ, when someone walks away from Whitebird, what's like the first thing you wish they would feel?
God, I don't know. I want them to leave feeling. Let's put it that way, just feeling.
Yeah. Ken?
I would want them to say, never again. What was this? I never want this. This was the worst thing that I could possibly. How could humans do this? And I want to read and study more and more and more about it and prevent it.
Yeah.
David?
I think if somebody can relate, first of all, the greatest compliment is if kids reread the book. When that happens, that's amazing. It means that that there was a lot there that they want to understand, and it's kind of, you want to rise up and examine again. And I think the fact that if somebody can, if a girl can relate to another girl in Europe in the 40s, that's the best you can do for me.
I want to revise my answer, because this was this was what I wanted. This is what I want them to walk away with. Absolutely.
Great. Perfect.
Yeah.
I did not read your book yet, at least to the last page.
All right, there you go. That's the last page.
Great. So now I would love to go on Q&A. We got some really great questions that came in during the course of our chat. And I'd like to start with this one. And it goes, is there such a thing as appropriate age ranges in Holocaust themed graphic novels? How early can we begin introducing children to these important books? RJ.
I personally think that the Holocaust should be part of the curriculum in the United States public schools and can be approached the way we approach the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King Day and stuff. Introduce children as early as kindergarten to sort of these themes, but in age appropriate ways. Obviously, we're not going to be showing, Night Will Fall to 6-year-olds, but and just be it part of the foundational sort of learning that they have, so that by the time they are in high school, and by the time they do read Maus, and by the time they do, they have some foundation on which to understand this, because it is kind of, if you think about the idea that there are, 16 and 17-year-olds who are coming to this without any inkling about what happened, it is kind of a shocking reality. And so I don't see why we wouldn't prepare kids at younger ages to understand things, the reality of what did happen, so that they can actually have, so that we can actually help them process these things.
David?
Yeah, I think exactly what I just said, and around 8, maybe 8-year-olds. To name a figure, I have no idea, but of course it's. I think most people have an intuitive feeling about their children, about what interests them and where they are. So it really depends, I think, yeah, but it's definitely okay to talk to 10-year-olds about these complicated things, because they've seen them and they've read about them in other places.
Ken?
Yeah, I think kids know about everything anyways, and they are always looking at stuff that they're not supposed to see. And I'd rather make sure that what they're finding out is sort of like like kind of what they, I'd let's make sure that they find out the right kind of a right answer, if there's a right answer, because they're going to be making stuff up anyway. I think there's so much information out there in the world. If we think we can hide stuff from kids, I don't think we're going to do a very good job of that.
Another question we got: why did you choose to tell stories of teenagers? How does the graphic novel format lend itself to the stage of life? Ken.
Well, teens love to have fun, and comics are fun. And they're fun to draw. It's just a lively. Great comics have been written about every stage of life. I just feel that there was a great. As I was researching the book, and I read something that a guy wrote about the Beatles when the Beatles came up, and he said teens will have their own fun. Teens will make fun. I mean, it doesn't. If you're living in like a detention camp or in a whatever, you'll make a tin can into an amplifier or something. So teens it's that moment in life where you're just full of possibility, and I don't know. I mean, it's a wonderful time of life. You have hair.
RJ, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's also fraught, though. It's. I mean, the thing with teens is and young, preteens as well. I mean, I love writing that viewpoint and from that time period in a person's life, because there is something so moving about the fact that they are experiencing so many things for the first time. And when you become an adult, you see that, you've seen that, you've done that, there's that kind of jaded aspect to one's life that happens. But when you're a teenager, a preteen, you're really these feelings that you're going through. Sometimes they're the very first time you're feeling that, and that emotion is as an artist really fun to delve into and to express and to write about. So that's why I like writing books for kids, about kids.
David?
I'm really not an authority on this, because I was born in the USSR and brought up in Israel without reading comics, really. The Bazooka I did read, but otherwise... So I don't have, and I believe we create for the child inside ourselves. Which, first of all, we're trying to interest ourselves, and it doesn't stop at any age. And I think the only thing that you need to take in mind to consider is what my understanding of something that is age appropriate is if the reader is experienced enough to understand what you're talking about. It's not about moral issues. It's about just understanding. This is why you wouldn't discuss sex with children. Besides it being a justified taboo, they don't have the hormones, the physiology. It does not relate to them, and But if you find something that you remember and understand, and you can communicate, so age is not an issue.
How long did it take from the concept to completion to create your books? There's no set timeline it takes to create a comic. Some of them take, sometimes days, sometimes years, sometimes decades. How long did it take for each of you to create the graphic novel that we're talking about today? RJ?
It took me about a year.
Ken?
I think it probably took about 2 years and change.
Mm-hmm. And David, how long did it take to create the graphic adaptation?
2.5, 2 years.
Okay. I think I want to end on this question because I think it's a really good one. And it goes, how do you think future artists and writers will portray the time we are living in now? What will the tone be? And David, why don't you start?
I have no idea. I just hope there's somebody there.
RJ?
Dark humor. Yeah, I would agree with David. No, I hope as we come through, and there's another side of this, and I'm hopeful, or I'm praying that what we're experiencing now at this very moment is we are sort of in the depths of a wave, a phase. And I do think if you look at history, humanity has gone through these sort of, ups and downs, and I think it has always been artists and writers who tweak the zeitgeist a little bit, who maybe raised, a generation to understand and to be aware of things, and then they treat each other with more kindness. I mean, that was my hope with Wonder, that kids would read it and be inspired to want to be kinder to one another. My hope with Whitebird was that young people would read it and remember the past and not relive it. The epigram of the book is the epigraph of the book is the George Santayana quote: "If we don't remember the past, we're condemned to relive it." So I would hope that somebody writing about this time we're in now would be able to write the ending on the other end of things, which is that we got out of this terrible period and we were all nicer to one another. I mean, that's my hope. You asked what the hope is. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that's my hope.
Ken?
I just want to read it so I can figure it out. I have no idea.
Yeah. So I think
Well,
There's Sydney.
Sydney, hi.
Hi, AJ, I think you said that was your last question,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all so much. This has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you to AJ for moderating, and I personally learned a lot. And thank you to all of you out there, especially I saw we have a lot of educators on, so thank you to you all especially. And everything we do at the museum is made possible through donor support. So to those of you watching, we hope you'll consider making a donation to support the museum, or becoming a member and joining us for our upcoming programs, which you can check out at the link in the Zoom chat. Have a great afternoon, and thank you all again for coming, and thank you again to our panelists and our moderator.